Okay, Shabbat Shalom and welcome to UIW. This is our Sabbath morning service coming to you live from St. Francisville this morning. Thank you very much for joining us and spending some of your Saturday morning with us here, and I'm glad to be here. So today we are in class 9, the 9th in our series called Prophet. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was just to remind you that last week, as I closed the class, one of the things that I brought up was an announcement that this Shabbat, today, I would begin to explore a subject from the prophets that I would call messianic figures or redemptive figures, I think is a better way to put it, as my class today will point out. And so when I say messianic figures, I want to make sure that you hear the S on the end. In other words, I'm going to be talking about various redemptive figures, because one of the things that I need to do at this point is to introduce to you some of the complexity within the Hebrew Bible that I think is often missed by people of the book. Whether we're talking about Jews or Christians, this complexity that exists within the Hebrew Bible is very important to show. And one of the things that this caused me to do, even though I've taught on the Messiah before and taught on various subjects related, it's been a while. It's been a while for me, and perhaps it's been a while for you. So I pulled out some of my old files from my file cabinet, and you can't see this necessarily, but this is a single sheet written on front and back, and it goes back to the 90s. Some of you were alive then, some of you were already adults by then, but some of you, it might be pushing things a little bit. But back in the 90s, James Tabor and several of us were discussing, this particular document came from James Tabor. We were discussing the various designations for these messianic or redemptive figures. So I want to stress that it's more complex than what most people see within the Hebrew Bible, and I think that's for a variety of reasons. When covering the prophets or the writings of the prophets, one is going to encounter various pictures of a coming age. And these examples that I want to begin with today are to begin to paint a picture that we're only going to touch on. We'll come back to it later. But just to give you an idea, an image, what was it that the prophets saw? I want you to begin this morning with me in the book of Isaiah. Go with me to Isaiah chapter 11. Isaiah chapter 11. And I just want to talk a little bit about the coming age. What is it that the prophets saw in their visions of what would be? So we're going to begin this morning in Isaiah 11 and verse 6. The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. And the cow and the bear shall feed, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox, and a sucking child shall play on the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the viper's nest. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, or of Jehovah, as the waters cover the sea. Now, I only read a portion of that prophetic vision of what is to come, but I wanted to give you that to begin with this morning. In other words, at some point, in accord with Isaiah's words, we're looking forward to a time when things are vastly different than they are today. Now, some might wonder how literally we are to take these things, but go with me, if you will, to that place when the world is drastically different, when what used to be enemies in the animal kingdom, at least, no longer that enmity will exist. Things will be, it's presented in a way as if it's a restoration of perhaps what was in Eden, in the garden. This same picture is given in Isaiah 65. I'll just read through a couple of these this morning. We're talking about the age that is to come, what the prophets saw in their visions that's quite glorious and quite beautiful. In Isaiah chapter 65 and verse 25, we have this same quote. And if you look at, the wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox, and dust shall be the serpent's food. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain. Go with me this morning also to Micah, to the book of Micah. I just want to read you a few more of these pictures. Micah chapter 4 and verse 1. But in the last days, now in Hebrew it's v'haya ba'acharit hayamim, but in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of Jehovah shall be established on the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and peoples shall stream towards it. And many nations shall come and say, Come and let us go up to the mountain of Jehovah, and to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For Torah shall go forth from Zion, and the word of Jehovah from Jerusalem. And he shall judge between many peoples, and decide concerning strong nations afar off. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, nor shall they learn war any more. But they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid, for the mouth of Jehovah of hosts has spoken it. For let all people walk every one in the name of his God, and we will walk in the name of Jehovah our God forever and ever. Now this particular passage, worded slightly differently, is also found in Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. But these are idyllic pictures of what is to come in the visions of the prophets. So the question is, how is it that our current troubled world, our planet with so much warfare, for instance, will reach a place where the knowledge of God covers the earth as the waters cover the sea, and there is no war? How do we go from where we are to that place? And first of all, this idyllic days to come is referred to primarily in rabbinic literature as the days of the Messiah. The days of the Messiah. There's an extensive amount of literature within Jewish writings that talk about the days of the Messiah. And so the question becomes, how do you get from here to the days of the Messiah? Most people of the book, primarily the Jewish people, believe that the one who ushers that glorious age in is called the Messiah. But of these days, the Talmud in Sanhedrin 99a says this about the days of the Messiah. All the prophets prophesied not, but of the days of the Messiah. In other words, their point being that when one begins to read the prophets, they automatically step into this place in time called the days of the Messiah. Now, the question that I have really about that statement is really hinged on whether or not I agree with the terminology. And some might think that I'm being a little bit nitpicky here. But nowhere in the Bible are these days to come, the Akarit Hayamim, the end days, nowhere in Scripture do we find the phrase the days of Messiah. So where does that term come? It is an attempt to describe and define and set parameters around the idyllic picture that the prophets paint for us. Most Jews and Christians, though they may disagree as to who the Messiah is, Christians have already decided that particular question. It's what sets them apart from the ancient world to today, is that they have identified already in their mind, in their understanding, in their belief system, who that final eschatological figure is. They believe that they know who this person is who will ultimately one day bring these transformations about. And the Jews, most religious Jews, have the same concepts, the same ideas about an idyllic age to which we are eventually going to arrive at. And they also believe that it is a single, for the most part, a single messianic figure who will usher in those days. So if you back up and you look at things from a distance, you'll see that both Judaism and Christianity have developed similarly in terms of how do we go from here to there. Does that make sense? In a general way. Some would say, well, there's absolutely no comparison. I beg to differ. There is comparison. There is considerable comparison, mainly around the idea that the chief agent of the redemptive process, the one who will bring us into those golden ages, if you will, is referred to as the Messiah. Judaism, the Rambam, many of you have heard the phrase, the name Rambam. And this is a shortened or an acronym, if you will, that represents Rabbi Moses ben Maimonides. He developed a list, an articles of faith, 13 articles of faith. And number 12 on the list, these are things that you should believe in if you embrace Judaism as your faith. And one of those, number 12, is, I believe by complete faith, or in perfect faith, in the coming of the Messiah, and though he tarry, I will wait expectantly for him every day. So there is this expectancy of a coming figure known as the Messiah in Judaism. Again, Christianity believes that this messianic agenda was accomplished partly in what Christians refer to as the first coming of the Messiah, and then they look and say, we've got a second coming of the Messiah, the same Messiah, very clearly they make this point, that will come and accomplish that latter transition into this Olam Haba, the age to come, the Akarit Hayamim, the last days and so forth. So today, having said all that, I'm not specifically teaching on the Messiah. I'm not specifically teaching on the Messiah. I've taught on that extensively and have series that I've posted online where I've gone for weeks and weeks and weeks and talked particularly about Messiah. But I do want to go through some of the text about Messiah, and then I'm going to get into what I consider to be the biblical idea to demonstrate the complexity of the subject matter around what I'm going to call redemptive figures, okay? So I'll give you some of the basics that most of you know, that when we talk about Messiah, and this is the prevalent view, Jews, Christians, everybody believes this. When we talk about Messiah, we're really dealing with a Hebrew concept. and a biblical concept. The biblical Hebrew from which we get the term Messiah, the Hebrew word is Mashiach, which comes from the root word mashak, which means to rub or to smear, and generally we're talking about oil. I've done demonstrations where I will take, say, a bowl and put a cracker in it and pour oil on top of the cracker. If I were to do that, rub that oil on the cracker, I would have just made a Messiah, an anointed thing. And you say, well, that's kind of ridiculous because you're dealing with crackers. Oh, really? Well, read the Hebrew Bible, because we have anointed wafers, the Messiahs, the anointed ones, throughout the book of Exodus and so forth. So the concept has to do with pouring oil on, anointing, to rub or smear with oil, whereby setting an object apart and sanctifying it, if you will, to designate it for a special purpose. Now, if you move from an object into a person, whether it be a priest or a king or whatever, now you're getting closer to what ultimately evolved into and developed into the view of a Mashiach in the terms of this eschatological figure. But the idea goes to this idea of pouring and rubbing and putting oil on for the purpose of setting that object, that person apart for special use. Now, some people will point out that there should be a distinction made between a Messiah or an anointed one, an object or even a person, and the Messiah, HaMashiach in Hebrew, that is something totally different. But I want to make the connection first with the idea. Now, I'm not going to focus in today's class on objects that are anointed. For that, I would recommend a longer series that I've done, 7 or 8, 9 classes on this where I go through step by step. But today I want to focus primarily on those people within the biblical text that are anointed, and this is a shortened, condensed, rapid fire, go through quite a few texts just to hit some high points. So I want you to go with me this morning to the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, to the book of Leviticus, chapter 4. And I tell people that this is one of the most anointed chapters in all the Bible. Leviticus chapter 4. And I want to go to verse 3. Leviticus 4 and verse 3. And it says, Im hakohen hamashiach, if the priest that is anointed do sin to bring guiltless or guiltiness on the people, then let him bring for his sin for which he has sinned a young bullock, and so forth and so on. The idea that I want to draw out is that we have here in Hebrew, im hakohen hamashiach, the priest, the anointed one, or as we would say grammatically in English, we would say the priest that is anointed, or the anointed priest. But you'll notice when I read the Hebrew that I said HaMashiach, the anointed one. The passages that I'm going to read you today in Leviticus chapter 4 and Leviticus chapter 6 are the only passages in the whole Hebrew Bible in which the word HaMashiach appears. That's it. Only here. And it's always, as you will see, associated with a certain person. Look at Leviticus 4 and verse 5. And the priest that is anointed shall take of the bullock's blood. The priest which is anointed in Hebrew is Hakohen HaMashiach, the anointed priest. Or you could say the priest, the Messiah, because HaMashiach is translated as the Messiah, the one who is anointed, the priest, the anointed one. Now look at verse 16, same language. And the priest that is anointed. Again, we have here HaKohen HaMashiach. One more, look at Leviticus 6. You need to have these, so if people ask you, where does the Bible mention HaMashiach, the anointed one, you can say, oh, it's really simple. It's only in Leviticus. It's in Leviticus 4, and it's in Leviticus chapter 6. Now, I'm going to look at chapter 6, verse 15. Now, in English, I believe it's verse 22. 6:22 for the English readers, 6:15 in Hebrew. And the priest of his sons that is anointed, and HaKohen HaMashiach. Now, so what we have in the Torah, other than objects, when we have various objects associated with worship in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, we have wafers, we have various objects which are anointed. But when it comes to people, the only person which is anointed in the Torah, in the 5 books, in the Pentateuch, the only one anointed is a priest. Now you can look at Deuteronomy 17, which talks about a king, but nowhere in Deuteronomy 17, verses 14 through 20, does it mention anointing a king. Now later we know in biblical history, throughout the biblical period, we find that kings were anointed. And you have to wonder, how did we go from, in the Torah, we only have priests which are anointed, but by the time we get to the biblical history throughout the prophets and so forth, that we find the anointing of kings. In fact, the bigger question, which I've taught on many times, is how did we go to get a king? Remember, the people requested to have a king like the nations, which was something that was not originally part of the vision of the way things should be. That's another class. As we work through biblical history, as we work through particularly 1st and 2nd Samuel, we start seeing many cases of anointing. We see in 1 Samuel 14 times the idea of a monarchy, from Saul, and references to Saul as the one who is anointed. He is the anointed one. And so you get this idea over and over throughout the biblical history. In 1 Samuel 14 times, 2 Samuel 3 times, in which this person is referred to as the anointed one. Let me make sure I didn't misstate something earlier. In the Torah, the only passage which refers to one as HaMashiach is the priest. By the time you get to these other passages that I'm talking about now in biblical history, you have kings which are referred to as HaMashiach. For instance, David in 1st and 2nd Samuel, as you read through these accounts, by the time you get to David, when he refers to Saul, he says quite often, I will not lift my hand against the Lord's anointed, against the Messiah. He refers to Saul as the Messiah. So I want to make sure that we understand that that is the case. Now I want you to go with me, if you will, to the book of Isaiah. Go with me to Isaiah and verse 45, chapter 45, Isaiah chapter 45. And I want to look at verse 1, Isaiah chapter 45 and verse 1. And it begins, Kol Mar Yehovah, thus says Jehovah to his anointed. In Hebrew, that's to his Mashiach. So we're talking about the Messiah of Jehovah. And it's Jehovah speaking, making reference to his Messiah. Thus says Jehovah to his Messiah, to Koresh, whose right hand I have held, that I may subdue nations before him and loose the loins of kings, that I may open before him doors and gates which shall not be shut. I will go before you and make the mountainous places level. You notice language that we've talked about? The high places will be brought low and so forth. I will break in pieces gates of brass, cut in sunders the bars of iron, and I will give you the treasures of darkness, hidden riches of secret places, that you may know that I, Jehovah, who call you by your name, am the God of Israel. For Jacob, my servant's sake, and Israel, my elect, I have even called you by your name. I've surnamed you, though you have not known me. I am Jehovah, and there is none else. There's no God beside me. I girded you, though you have not known me, that they may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is none beside me. I am Jehovah, there is none else. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, Jehovah, do all these things. Ladies and gentlemen, what I just read to you was a message from Jehovah to his anointed. Now, I know a lot of people will read verses of that out of context, and they're great verses. I am Jehovah and there is none else, that they may know from the rising of the sun to the setting. Well, context matters. I just read between the white spaces. Isaiah 45:1 through verse 7 is what he spoke to his Messiah, who he calls Koresh. Now, in English, that's generally represented as Cyrus, but in the Hebrew, he's talking to a Persian monarch, Persian ruler by the name of Koresh, and he says, I'm going to use you. You don't even know me, but I'm going to use you to begin to bring about some very important points in eschatology even. Now, I want you to look back with me at chapter 44, verse 24. Thus says Jehovah, your Redeemer, and he that formed you from the womb. I am Jehovah that makes all things, that stretches the heavens alone, that spreads abroad the earth by myself, that frustrates the omens of impostors and makes diviners mad, that turns wise men backward and makes their knowledge foolish, that confirms the word of his servant and performs the counsel of his messengers, that says to Jerusalem, you shall be inhabited, and to the cities of Judah, they shall be rebuilt, and their ruins I shall raise up, that says to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up thy rivers, that says of Koresh, he is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, and saying to Jerusalem, you shall be rebuilt, and to the temple your foundation shall be laid. Then we have the white space, and then we have the verse that I just read. Thus says Jehovah to his anointed, to Koresh. We're talking about a person that is not even an Israelite. You could say he's not Jewish. Of course he's not Jewish. He's Persian. He's also not Israelite. He's Persian. So my question this morning is, when we think about the designation or the term or the phrase Messiah, the word Messiah, we have been told by many, Jewish and Christian, that biblically people want to pretend that the Messiah, this chief eschatological figure, is clearly defined in the pages of the Bible. You know, if you ask most people, you ask most scholars, most sages, whatever, you say, hey, tell me about the Messiah. They'll tell you, textbook, well, he's going to be a descendant of King David. He's going to be this. He's going to be that. He's going to rebuild the temple. He's going, you know, and they have a checklist. You go check, 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 check. Well, what you do is you ask them, you say, well, how does this fit in with the idea of the biblical Messiah, of a chief eschatological figure called the Messiah who is to come? So I'm not denying that there is or that there are texts which talk about one who will come and who will rebuild the temple and so forth. But is that figure called the Messiah? I just showed you that a foreign ruler by the name of Koresh is called the Messiah, but he didn't even, not only is he not of the people of Israel, he didn't even know God. He says, you don't even know me. I called you, I call you by your name and you don't even know who I am. This is a Gentile that Jehovah used to bring about his purposes. Now, it's interesting to me that in verse 28 of Isaiah 44, we have a reference that says of Koresh, he is my shepherd. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. What about this term shepherd? Does that appear in some of the literature which talks about that I can use to demonstrate the complexity of a redemptive figure? Why use the term shepherd? We'll talk about that. So let's look at a few more passages that deal with the Messiah. The Messiah. I want you to go with me to the book of Habakkuk, and I want to go to chapter 3 of Habakkuk and verse 13. Habakkuk 3, verse 13. And I'm picking up, I'm not reading the entire section, but it says, you have come forth for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your anointed. You've crushed the head of the house of the wicked, uncovering it from the foundation to the neck. Selah. Here, the Messiah, you've come forth for the salvation of your Mashiach, your people. Now here in this particular passage and in other places, we have the term Messiah used for the people of God. This isn't a singular eschatological figure. It's referring to the people. Now we're going to go to the Psalms. Now there are 10 passages in the Psalms, and I can go through these pretty quickly, but I do want to go through these. In Psalm 2, verse 2, the kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against Jehovah and against his Messiah, or against his anointed. Now you can go through. People have attributed this text as a messianic text. Many people will call this a messianic text because it mentions the anointed one. Go with me to Psalm 18 and verse 51. In English, it's probably going to be verse 50. Great deliverance he gives to his king. He shows steadfast love to his Messiah, to David, and to his seed forevermore. Very important to see what's being said here. What in this passage in Psalm 18, the last verse of Psalm 18, says that David and his seed are the Messiah forevermore. Now this is developing late in biblical literature, but once you get to David, you get this idea that the messianic picture, according to most, becomes more focused. We're now going to identify a lineage whereby the Messiah will come from, David and his seed. Now look at chapter 20 and verse 7, or verse 6 in English, I believe. Now I know that Jehovah saves his Messiah, his anointed, and he answers him from his holy heaven with the saving strength of his right hand. Now this is a psalm of David. So David knows that David and his seed are the anointed. They've been set apart for a particular purpose. Look at chapter 28, Psalm 28 and verse 8. Jehovah is a strength to them, and He is the saving strength of His Messiah, His anointed, your people. And save your people and bless your inheritance and shepherd them and carry them forever. A few more. Let's go to Psalm 84. I just want to establish this before we move into the more difficult things, if you will, the more complex matters. 84, Psalm 84, verse 10, 9 in English. Behold, O God, our shield, and look upon the face of your Messiah. For a day in your courts is better than 1,000. Okay, so you're anointed, you're Messiah. Look at 89, Psalm 89, 39, 38 in English. But you have cast off and rejected, you've been angry with your Messiah. See, a lot of people, they don't think about the Messiah as having attracted God's anger. But that depends on how you define anointed one. Look at 89:52 or 51 in English. 89:51 in English, 52. O Jehovah, wherewith they have insulted the footsteps of your Messiah. Blessed be Jehovah forevermore. Amen and amen. Now, Psalm 105. And verse 15. Let me back up and read verse 12. When they were but a few in number, Psalm 105, verse 12. When they were but few men in number, of little account, and sojourners there, when they went from one nation to another, from one kingdom to another people, He suffered no man to do them wrong, but He reproved kings for their sakes, saying, touch not my Messiah, and do my prophets no harm. It's talking about the people. Again, there are several passages that we've covered that deal with or that identify the Messiah with the people of Israel. And by the way, you can put in your notes that this is also, this same passage appears in 1 Chronicles 16, verse 22. Lamentations, chapter 4, verse 20. I'm not going to read that one to you. That's also in my notes, but it deals with the Messiah. Now go with me to the book of Daniel. To the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 9. And we're going to get into a couple more of these passages just to lay the groundwork for what we will pick up in subsequent classes. But if you look at chapter 9 of Daniel, I just want to read verse 23. Let me go to verse 22. 9:22, sorry. And he made me understand and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I am now come forth to give you skill and understanding. At the beginning of your supplication, the commandment went out, and I am come to declare it, for you are greatly beloved. Therefore, look into the word and consider the vision. 70 weeks are decreed concerning your people and concerning your holy city, to finish the transgression, and to make an end to sins, and to atone for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up vision and prophet, and to anoint the most holy place. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem until an anointed prince shall be 7 weeks, then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with square and moat, but in troubled time. And after 62 weeks shall an anointed one be cut off, and none shall be left to him. And the people of a prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and his end shall be with the flood, and to the end where war, desolations are decreed, and so forth. Now, in this particular passage, in chapter 9, verse 25 and 26, we also have mention of a Messiah. In fact, it talks about a Messiah being cut off. What does that mean? The anointed prince. Who is the anointed prince? Now, of course, obviously in Christianity, there is a particular interpretation, and they make the dates fit the way that they calculate, so that to them, this is mentioned as a clue, if you will, a prophecy pointing towards the one that they choose to be the Messiah. No, is that silly? Is there anything to that? Well, you might be surprised. We'll talk about that. Not today. Look with me at Isaiah chapter 61. Isaiah 61. You know, it's funny when we talk about Daniel, a lot of people following certain scholarly views will say, this is all past. The book of Daniel, as they say, I think there's a book I read years ago called The Mystery is History. It's all historical. It's about Antiochus. It's about this. It's about that. And what I'll tell you now, which we'll talk about in another class, is that is not true. There are elements that don't fit that period. But that's for another class. Isaiah chapter 61. Isaiah 61. Verse 1. Ruach Adonai Yehovah. The Spirit of Adonai Jehovah is upon me, because Jehovah has anointed me to announce good tidings to the meek. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim an acceptable year of Jehovah, and a day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all that mourn, to appoint those who mourn in Zion, to give them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of the spirit of heaviness, that they might be called trees of righteousness, the planting of Jehovah, that he might be glorified. And they shall build the old waste. They shall, and it goes on and on. So the question is, who is this? Who is this who says, the Spirit of Adonai Jehovah is upon me, he has anointed me? Is this Isaiah? Or is it the introduction? Do we have here the voice of an eschatological figure that is to come? We know, of course, again, that Christianity took this in one direction. But what do we see in this particular passage? If we only rely on the text, what does it teach us? Now here, this person, whoever is speaking, says that Jehovah has anointed me, and again it uses the word Mashiach. Ya'an Mashiach Yehovah Oti, that Jehovah has anointed the speaker here. This phrase, this word Mashiach, is used in this verbal form 67 times in the Hebrew Bible. We're not going through those today. The question that I have with this background is the chief eschatological figure that brings us from our current troubled times into the days of the Messiah, as they are described in various rabbinic writings and so forth. Is that person who ushers us from point A to point B, is that person called the Messiah? What if I told you that the Messiah is greatly overrated in the Hebrew Bible? No matter what others have said, question becomes, what does the Bible say? You see, I have long believed, based on my studies, that believers, be they Jew or Christian, let's just say people of the book, I've long believed that people of the book have oversimplified things. And part of the problem, which resulted in confused theology and confused doctrines and misunderstandings, is this idea that people have tended to call Bible things by names which are not indicated in the text. That's one of the problems. It's one of the problems. There are other problems. One of the other problems is that the ambiguity, the complexity of things has been oversimplified and removed. So certain terms and phrases, words and titles are conflated from what the Hebrew Bible presents as a vast, complex system conflated it into just a few, sometimes even one figure. But the Hebrew Bible is not that simple, I don't believe. I don't believe that some of the things which have been conflated and blurred, the lines have been, I don't think that some of these things are intended by the biblical writers. My question is, why would we not use biblical language when we're talking about the Bible? We have to be careful when we pull things together and suggest that this term should be used of this figure. Okay? Why not allow the Bible to speak for itself? Have we, the people of the book, called Messiah what Scripture calls by another name or title? Have we attributed passages which are not messianic and called them messianic, even though the phrase is never used or the word Messiah is not used in some of these texts? I'll give you a case in point. I've taught on this before, but this is important to underscore what I'm saying. Daniel chapter 7. Let's go to Daniel. Daniel chapter 7. And by the way, there's something interesting that happens when you get to Daniel chapter 7. The book of Daniel up until chapter 7 is given in the third person. And once you get to Daniel chapter 7, something happens. We transition to material first person. We see that Daniel begins to present in his own behalf, his own words, his own vision. Let's go with me you come with me to Daniel chapter 7 and verse 2. Daniel spoke and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven stirred up the great sea, and four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse from one another. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings, and I beheld till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made to stand upon 2 feet like a man. And a man's heart was given to it, and behold, another beast, a second one like a bear, and it raised itself on one side. It goes on and it gives some of this. Now what I want to do is I want you to go down with me to verse 9. As I looked, thrones were placed, and an ancient of days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of whose head was like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, its wheels being burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. They sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I looked then because of the sound of the great words which the horn spoke. And as I looked, the beast was slain, its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. And as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like a son of man, Bar Enosh, came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and tongues should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. The Talmud, Sanhedrin 98. There's a discussion about the Messiah. And they're looking at all these texts in the Bible that are labeled messianic. And they want to know, in what way, nature will the appearance of the Messiah be? And there's a discussion, and some say, well, it depends. In one verse, says Rabbi Joshua, it is written, behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven. While in another it says, behold, your king comes to you lowly and riding upon a donkey. This is the kind of discussion that happens among religious people. They read a text and they say, oh, it's talking about the Mashiach. He's coming on the clouds of heaven. Someone else might say, but what about where he rides in lowly on it? It depends. Maybe if we're good, he comes on the clouds. Maybe if not, he comes on a donkey. But is that what this is talking about? The vision, the people of the book, a Jewish people, extreme Judaism going all the way back. Yeah, this is messianic. The Dead Sea Scrolls, yep. Early Christianity, yep. It's talking about a Messiah figure. A coming redemptive eschatological figure. So a lot of people might be thinking, oh, this is just Christianity. Shake your head like this. No, it's not. This is pretty much everybody says this is a Messiah. It's not just Christians. But you know who did not think that's what it meant? Daniel. The one whose words we're reading would not have lined up with that identification. And you know why? Because he didn't know who it was, and he was troubled. Look with me at verse 15 of Daniel 7. And as for me, Daniel, my spirit was grieved in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head affrighted me. I came near to one of them that stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he doesn't know what it means. He doesn't say, oh man, that's cool. The Messiah is coming on the clouds of heaven. Come, please, come. No, he doesn't know. He's greatly troubled. He's vexed. His visions that he's having. He doesn't know. And so then the person who comes begins to tell what this is. These great beasts. So he told me and made known to me the meaning of the things. Now let me ask you, let's keep reading that. Remember, Daniel has a question. He's troubled. I don't know what this means. I don't know what this represents. If you have someone there on the spot that he goes to, knowing that the person he goes to has the interpretation, if let's say by chance, the meaning is given in what follows, should we pay attention to it or not? I mean, yes or no? Maybe, maybe not. Why would we not? Why would we stop at verse 14 and say, oh, let me tell you what this means? And you're like, well, can I ask a question? Doesn't it tell us what it means down below? Look at verse 17. These great beasts, which are four kings, who shall rise out of the earth. But the holy ones of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Now, who was it in the vision? Remember, the whole question is, what does this mean? in the vision, the Son of Man takes possession of the kingdom. It's a vision. The interpretation tells us, who is it that takes the kingdom? You following me? It's the Son of Man. Well, here in verse 17 and 18, it's the holy ones, plural, of the Most High shall take the kingdom and shall possess it. He didn't know what it meant. He asked what it meant. And so now we have to understand that the Son of Man of the vision is not a messianic eschatological figure coming on the clouds like most people believe it is, but it's the holy ones gaining possession of the kingdom. Stick with me. Go to verse 21. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the holy ones and prevailed against them until the Ancient of Days came. Remember the Ancient of Days in the vision? Remember that? And judgment was given for the holy ones of the Most High. And the time came that the holy ones possessed the kingdom. Look down at verse 25. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the holy ones of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand for a season, and seasons, and half a season. But they shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and dominion, and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole of heaven, shall be given to the people of the holy ones of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. Now, someone might ask, yes, but my religious tradition says something else. Can I please still believe that? Believe what you want. I'm just saying, when we read the text, the vision is given, and its interpretation is given. So I want to start at least with that. Now, if someone wants to continue and believe otherwise, that's up to you. Many texts hint at messianic or redemptive figures to come. All right? Now, whether or not these are correct or not is just part of the questions that we're going to have to ask and answer over the next several weeks. Right now, I want to introduce you to a few of these just to go through, again, the complexity. Daniel chapter 7, verse 13 and following, the vision of the Son of Man, clearly has been identified as a messianic text. But we just saw that, maybe that's not what it was. Maybe it's something. You could say it points to days to come, and in that sense, it's messianic. The word Messiah is never mentioned, though. Who is the Son of Man? Is the Son of Man a figure, a singular figure? Is it a group? Okay, well, we have a lot of these. Go with me to Genesis 49. I'm just going to highlight a few of these that we can delve into in future classes. Genesis 49. And I want to start by reading the first two verses of 49, just to lay the groundwork. And Yaakov called to his sons and said, gather yourselves together that I may tell you what will befall you in the Acharit Hayamim, in the latter days, or the last. Now, this seems to indicate that Jacob is painting a prophetic picture for his sons. So you could say, well, these are prophetic. Look down at verse 10. This is considered a messianic passage. 49:10. The staff shall not depart from Judah, nor the scepter from between his feet, ad ki yavo Shiloh, until Shiloh comes, and the obedience of the people be his. This translation that I'm looking at, as many do, capitalizes, first of all, it transliterates the word Shiloh. We talk about Shiloh's coming. You take Shiloh, you bring it into English from the Hebrew, and like it's a personal name, until Shiloh comes. But is that what it means? Ad ki yavo Shiloh. Now, there are various translations. Some propose that it says until the one to whom it belongs comes, basically. So there are all sorts of things, but I just want to talk about this for just a second. Is Shiloh the name of the Messiah? Look down at verse 24, 49:24. This is about Joseph. This is the blessing to Joseph. And it says, but his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made supple by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From thence, from the shepherd, the stone of Israel, by the God of your father, who shall help you, and by the Almighty, and so forth. The stone, Misham Ro'eh Even Yisrael. From there, a shepherd, a stone of Israel. This is considered messianic. It's saying that, but you have to ask yourself, what does it mean, Misham, from there? From where? From Joseph? Does that mean the area where the Joseph tribes were in the land of Israel? Or is it somehow pointing forward to the scattering of the Joseph tribes, and that this figure known as Ro'eh Even Yisrael, the shepherd stone of Israel, is this a title of a redemptive figure? It's a question. Look with me at the book of Numbers, Bamidbar. Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, chapter 24. Numbers 24. These are the words of Bilaam. Bilaam was a pagan seer. But he says in 24:7, let's look at verse 15. 24, verse 15. The speech of Bilaam, the son of Bayor, the speech of the man whose eyes are open, the saying of him that hears the words of God and knows the knowledge of the Most High, seeing the vision of the Almighty, falling down but having his eyes open. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but he is not near. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and he shall smite the corners of Moab and destroy the children of Seth, and on and on. Who is the scepter? I see him, but not now, not near. He's looking and he sees what he calls a scepter, a star. Now, where it says a scepter, in Genesis 49, it's the same Hebrew word. So again, are we talking about a redemptive figure that's known as the scepter, who's going to come and smite the corners of Moab and so forth? There are plenty of passages about shepherd. You know, if you think about biblically, we have Moses and David and their shepherdesses as well. Rachel and so forth. I mean, you get this idea that a shepherd is a key occupation in this ancient world. Even now, if you go to Israel with us, you'll see shepherds and shepherdesses grazing with their flocks, or, But is this shepherd, for instance, the shepherd stone, the Ro'eh Even of Genesis 24 or Genesis 49:24, is this a designation for this figure that is to come? Look with me at Ezekiel 34. Ezekiel 34. And I want to go through quite a few more quickly, but Ezekiel 34 in verse 23. Now, by the way, I'm not going to read the whole context, but if you want to read the whole context, Ezekiel 34, chapter 34, verse 20 through 31, but I'm only going to read verse 23. And I will set up one shepherd over them, and he shall feed them, namely my servant David. He shall feed them, and he shall be their shepherd. And I will be their God, and my servant David shall be a prince among them. Now there we have a figure who is to come, who's called the shepherd, who's going to be a shepherd over God's people, and God says, I'm going to raise him up. Oh, by the way, his name is David. You know him, David. This is not looking to a descendant of David, but to David himself as a shepherd. Look at chapter 37 of Ezekiel, 37 and verse 24, 37:24. Again, context, you would have to begin in verse 15 and go through 28, but I just want to read verse 24. And David, my servant, shall be king over them, and they shall all have one shepherd. They shall also follow my judgments and observe my statutes and do them, and so forth. David is the shepherd. Now, is that somehow connected to these other passages about the shepherd? Look with me at Micah, please. Micah chapter 5. In Micah chapter 5 and verse 1. Now, in English Bibles, it's going to be verse 2, but Micah chapter 5, verse 1. Now, let me get to the right book. I'm looking at Amos, and something didn't look right. One second. Micah 5, verse 1. But you, Bethlehem Ephratah, or Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me one that is to be ruler in Israel. His goings forth are from ancient time, from days of old. Therefore will he give them up until the time when she who travails is brought forth. Then the remnant of his brethren shall return to the children of Israel. And he shall stand and feed his flock in the strength of Jehovah, in the majesty of the name of Jehovah his God, and they shall abide. For now he shall be great unto the ends of the earth. And this shall be peace when Ashur shall come into our land, and when he shall tread in our palaces, then shall we raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 princes of men, and they shall graze the land of Ashur with the sword, the land of Nimrod with the keen blade. Thus shall he deliver us from Ashur, which is Assyria, when he comes to our land and when he treads within our border. That, ladies and gentlemen, is within the white spaces. We're talking about context. We're talking about a person who is coming, who is called a ruler. A ruler. Who is this ruler who is to come? He says, from you to me, he will come forth. This particular ruler, whoever it is, says that his goings forth means more than once, or from ancient times. Who are we talking about? Who would fit this description? And somehow, the person who is the ruler, who is from Jehovah, whose goings forth have been from ancient times, is to be the one who delivers the children of Israel from Assyria. That's context. Now, is Bethlehem Ephratah, is that talking about a place? Christianity took it in that direction. The Gospels would declare that this is a location. Now, Bethlehem, you have to put the Messiah in Bethlehem as if that's what it's talking about. But here it's very, and by the way, Bethlehem Ephratah is a place. Go with me to Genesis 35. I'm not going to say that there isn't a basis for this. Genesis 35 and verse 16. Genesis 35, verse 16. It says, and they journeyed from Bethel, and there was but a little way to come to Ephrat. A little way to come to Ephrat. Now, by the way, in Hebrew, that's Ephratah. I'll explain in a moment. And Rachel travailed, and she had hard labor, and it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said to her, fear not, you shall have this son also. And it came to pass as her soul was departing, for she died, that she called his name Ben-Oni, but his father called him Ben-Yamin. And Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrat, which is Bethlehem. Now in Hebrew, if I want to be specific, I can talk about a place called Ephrat. But if I want to give you directions, and you go, hey, where is Rachel buried? I'll say, Bethlehem Ephratah means towards Ephrat. It's called the Hey directive in Hebrew, Ephratah. It's Ephrat, but it's towards Ephrat, Bethlehem Ephratah. So the idea here is that and this is the way Christianity took this passage in Micah 5, was that it was talking about a place, Beit Lechem Ephratah, towards Ephrat. Notice another thing that's interesting about this is that in Micah 5, you have a reference to the one who gives birth will give birth again. So you could say, hey, wait a minute. Remember Rachel gave birth at Beit Lechem Ephratah? This is saying that Rachel's children, look, I once taught this. This is, you can put together a pretty good class for this. But the idea we have to ask is, does Micah 5 actually speak about a place? Look at it again. You, Beit Lechem Ephratah, though you are little among the thousands or the clans of Judah. It's talking about a family. Now, the way that the Gospels handle this is they just put the word land in. There's no, it says, you can go look it up in the Gospel of Matthew. It says, the land of Judah. Well, that's not here. What is Beit Lechem Ephratah? Go with me to 1 Chronicles chapter 2. 1 Chronicles 2 and verse 3. And we'll start there. I just want to show you something. Some of you know this. 1 Chronicles 2:3 says, the sons of Judah, Onan, Shelah, which 3 were born to him of the daughter of Shua the Canaanite woman. Let's see where I'm looking for. The firstborn sons, I'm looking in, I must be off because of the English. Okay, let me take you to the next one. Look at verse 19. Let's see if that one puts us on it. Okay. And when Azuvah was dead, Caleb took to him Ephrat, who bore him Hur. Okay, so notice the name Ephrat. Now look down at verse 24. And after Chetzron had died in Caleb Ephratah, then Aviah, Chetzron's wife, bore him Ashur, the father of Tekoa. Look down at verse 50 of chapter 2. I'm showing you the common names in this particular family. These were the sons of Caleb, the son of Hur, the firstborn of Ephratah. So we're talking about a family line descended from Judah, a family line that has these names. Now look at 1 Chronicles 4. 1 Chronicles 4 and verse 1. The sons of Judah, Peretz, Hetzron, Carni, Hur, Shoval, and Reiah, the son of Shoval, begot Yachat. I'm showing you the family. Now look down at verse 4. And Penuel, the father of Gedor, and Ezer, the father of Husha. These are the sons of Hur, the firstborn of Ephratah, the father of Beit Lechem, or Bethlehem. So I just wanted to show you the names. When we talk about Micah 5 is talking about the clans of Judah. So 1 Chronicles 2 indicates that clan of Judah, you break it down, you start seeing the names. Ephrat, you've got Beit Lechem, you've got all these different names. The question is, who is this ruler? The setting and the context provide clues that we can't ignore. What about the shepherd's stone? Is the stone another name for one who is an eschatological figure? We're going to take this further. I've got plenty of material on shepherds and these redemptive figures, but we're going to have to pick this up later because we still have to go through the stone. Who is the stone that the builders rejected? Plenty of text dealing with these various figures. The complexity of these redemptive figures requires another class, further study. We'll go through more of these because we want to ask and answer the question, are we talking about a singular messianic figure who is to come, or a series? And speaking of series, join me next Shabbat as we continue our series on prophet. Shabbat Shalom.